Hello and welcome to this video. It's me, Ronald. Today we're going to be talking about the rest of the books that I read this year. We're just going to talk about how my reading year in 2023 went in general. Before we get started, I want to give a minor spoiler warning. I'm going to try not to spoil the whole plot, but just in case, this is your spoiler warning. I'll cover the books I read from July all the way to the end of the year, and then I'm going to give out some awards to some of the books that I liked and some books I didn't like this year. So first, I want to go ahead and talk about the books I did do videos on and just let you know that if you want my full thoughts on those books, to go check out those videos. These are the books that I've done videos on, and these are the ratings that I've given them. Now that we've gotten those books out the way, there are two books here that I want to talk about that I will be doing videos on. The first is Before I Let Go. So Before I Let Go was the book swap that me and Tati did for the month of July. It was my turn to choose the book, and I was on my quest to look for a male equivalent to Waiting to Exhale. Y'all know how the first one went, and so this was the second attempt. I'm not really gonna go too much into detail about it, but I did give this book a 4. Now, whether it was successful in its attempt to be equivalent to Waiting to Exhale, you're just gonna have to wait for the video to see how that went. I did enjoy it more than Men Cry in the Dark. I enjoyed the men, they were a lot more relatable. And the other book is The Women of Brewster Place. That is another book swap book that I'm doing with my sister. And so I'll just say that I gave this book a 5. I really enjoyed it. I read the whole thing in one day. I think that says a lot about how much I enjoyed the book. So now that we've gotten those squared away, let's talk about the books that I read this year that I'm not doing videos on. The first one that we'll be talking about is Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. I read that book in August because it was a book club pick. So this is hilarious because Tati just texted me about this book that I'm about to rant about. I'm about to rant about Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. I'm on chapter 6 and I'm exhausted. Tati describes it as Siri, but with relatable trauma to black people, specifically black women. And I'm gonna have to kind of agree, but unfortunately Siri was a better book than this is. I'm just tired of reading it. I'm only on chapter 6. It's 41 chapters. I'm tired of reading it. It's just irritating, and the way the book is written, it's like one of those books that's like explaining blackness and what it's like to be black, and I'm black. I don't need an explanation on what it's like to be black. I know what it's like. I live the life every day. And this girl, she keep talking about how her life fell apart and how she had it all planned. And I'm like, girl, you done said that about 5-6 times. We got it the first time. You don't got to keep saying it. We get it. Your life done fell apart. Get on with the story. I hate books that be doing that mess. So today is August 19th. I have been reading Black Girls Must Die Exhausted for over a month. And I, as a black man, am exhausted from reading this book. I'm trying to finish it this weekend because I got other things to do in my life, and I don't want to be on this book all day. Only one person has finished this book, and it's the person who chose it, and that person struggled through the book. The rest of us, we are struggling, and it's to the point that the book club members are considering DNFing the book because all of us don't like it. It has a plot, I'll give it that, but the plot is just boring and hard to get through. Tabitha, the main character, has no sense, and it's like she hears what she wants to hear instead of hearing what's actually being said. And so a lot of these situations are because she be misinterpreting stuff instead of actually paying attention to what's actually being said in the conversation. It was looking at a 0, but it might get a 2. And I know that's sad. I'm not done yet, so we gonna see. But if it gets a 2, that's sad, because that's gonna mean it was worse than Falcon 7. I'm not even all that invested, and I'm getting close to the end of the book. This is supposed to be the part where everything like falls apart. The way it's falling apart is so stupid, because it's like, what are we fighting for? Y'all just had a whole fight over nothing. Yes, it's supposed to be a misunderstanding, but it's like the way it happened, this could have been done better. I'm gonna be really sad if this is the worst book I read this year, because I don't want a black person to be the first book that I've read this year. It's low-key worse than Falcon 7 and Siri and Ready Player One. Like, these 4 books so far, they all go together in like the worst books I've read this year. But with Falcon 7, it was annoying, but at least by like the second half, I wouldn't say it was interesting, but I was at least like, well, let's see what's gonna happen. Like, that's the only reason I was pushing through at that point, just to see what's gonna happen. This book, I don't even care what happens. I'm just trying to finish it so like we can get to the next book in book club. The next book we're gonna read sound interesting. I can't wait to see what that is gonna be about. Siri was annoying, but at least Mia as a protagonist was interesting. So I was at least invested in seeing what went on with her. Ready Player One, at least the quest itself, once we got to it, was interesting. Like, I was interested to see how the quest was gonna go. This book, I'm not interested in Tabitha. I'm not interested in the plot. Nothing is interesting. And for some reason, she wanna hold on to struggle love with Mark, even though when Mark first came on the scene, we could tell he wasn't really feeling her like that. I done gave him a year and a half of my life. It's like she wants to give Bernadine.
Yeah, I was your white woman for 11 years.
I'm gonna be mad if it's the worst book I read this year. And then it's the first in a trilogy. I'm like, nah, what could possibly need to go on for 2 more books? And then the fact that the person with the most sense is Miss Gretchen, who is Tabitha's grandma's friend, and Tabitha's grandma's also named Tabitha. Tabitha's named after her grandma. Miss Gretchen is her friend, and Tabitha's grandma and Miss Gretchen are white. Why is the white lady the one with all the sense in this book? The title is something that Grandma Tabitha said when she said back in the day when she was young, she would look at black girls and she would be like, oh my gosh, they must die exhausted from all they have to go through. And I'm like, so this is not even something that protagonist Tabitha said. This is something that Grandma Tabitha said. I got about 10 to 12 chapters left. I'm ready to be done. I can't with this book no more. It's August 20th. It's about 1:30 in the morning. I just finished Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, and I'm exhausted. I really don't know when I'm going to rate this book because it's definitely going in the camp of worst books I've read this year. I did not like this book at all. I think it's only one part of this book where I actually felt some level of emotion. If you read the book, it's not the part you think it would be. I'm trying not to spoil it, but some third act foolishness that happens in the third act of the book, and I'm just like, why? What ends up happening is supposed to be like very emotional, but I was reading it and I'm like, I don't care. I didn't care about either one. Like, most of the time reading this book, I would just be like, oh my gosh, really? Like, rolling my eyes, just like, really? Did we really have to put this in the book? Because, like, some of the messages were so heavy-handed. Like, me and Tati were talking about this, and like, this book is kind of like the scenarios that happen, they're real life scenarios, but it's always like the best outcome that could happen. Like, it's not realistic to what would actually happen in real life. And that's what this book is like. This book is like fantasy drama. The scenarios are true. You could definitely see a black person going through it, but then the outcome is like, really, like, that's fantasy. Like, really, that more than likely would not happen. Falcon 7 was worse than Siri, Who Am I? And Ready Player One. And Black Girls Must Die Exhausted was worse than those books too. Falcon 7, I did not like Jack John. I did not like the storyline. Jack John himself as a protagonist was terrible. He didn't grow, didn't learn nothing. The storyline was irritating and annoying. Towards the end, I was kind of interested in just seeing what would happen. Black Girls Must Die Exhausted is kind of on level with Falcon 7. I didn't like Tabitha, the protagonist, all that much. I don't know if she really experienced any growth. The storyline wasn't all that interesting or engaging to me. I really was counting down the chapters till we got to the end. Like, that's how much I did not like this book. Which is why I'm like, it's kind of on level with Falcon 7. Because I was doing the same thing with Falcon 7. I was reading it, like, counting down the chapters till we got to the end because I was ready to be done with that book. So that's why I'm like, do I want to give this a 3 or do I want to give it a 2? Because if I give it a 2, that would mean that it was worse than Falcon 7, but it really wasn't. They're really like kind of on the same level, and this book deserves a 2. Like, this is not a 3 to me. Like, when I give a book a 3, it's average. It wasn't something I necessarily enjoyed, but it wasn't terrible either, and I'm not gonna read it again. I'm like, should I give this a 3 or should I bump Falcon 7 down to a 2? That book had me exhausted. I gave it a 2. I appreciate what the author was trying to do. The other book club members, they're all black women. The way they described it was this book was like a fantasy version of their experience, because what this book is trying to do is trying to give like a look at what the black woman experience is like, but the way they described it, they were like, it's like what our lives would look like if things always worked out in the end. They said it's like a fantasy version of what their experience is like, and I have to agree. Tabitha, the protagonist, she was the issue with the book. The side characters, they were interesting. The storyline was irritating because it was Tabitha's life, and because she's irritating, the storyline's irritating. Everything else was the interesting part, but Tabitha, I didn't care about. It just wasn't an enjoyable book. And so the next book I read in the month of August was Around the World in 80 Days. I read this because I had the movie recorded, and that movie was 3 hours long, and it was taking up space on the DVR, so I had to get that off of there. So I ended up reading this book right after I finished Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, and I gave it a 4 because reading it coming off of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, it was like the perfect book to read coming off of that book because it was just so interesting. It was fun. It was whimsical. I just enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the movie too. Then in the month of September, I read Dune. This is a long story, so get in. I want to say back in like 2019, I saw this video on Dune, and it was talking about the book and the old movie from the 80s, right? It was just talking about like all the little differences and stuff like that. And so I was like, you know what? I'm interested to see this movie. So I bought the book because y'all know me. I like to read the book before I see the movie, right? Do y'all see this? Do y'all see this? This was showed up when I bought the book. So when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that's not finna be read anytime soon. So what ended up happening was they released a new adaptation of Dune. So they're showing the old one on TV. And I'm like, okay, let me record it. So I recorded it to watch when I eventually read the book. Because the book looked like that, I was like, we probably don't get to this no time soon. And so what ended up happening was the movie was taking up space on the DVR. So I was like, okay, I gotta delete it. So I deleted it, but thankfully it was on Tubi, right? So I'm like, okay, it's on Tubi. So I bookmark it on Tubi. Then it appears on Netflix after it comes off Tubi. So I'm like, okay. So I put it on my list on Netflix. So then I go to watch Pride and Prejudice because it's getting ready to leave, right? And I've been looking for that version forever because I've seen the 90s miniseries, I saw the movie from the 40s, but I've been looking for the 2005 movie forever to watch and I couldn't find it nowhere to watch. And so it's on Netflix and it's getting ready to leave. I'm like, let me go watch this movie. So I go watch Pride and Prejudice and I see Dune leaving soon. We're halfway through September. It's leaving at the end of September. So I ended up reading Dune in 2 weeks because I didn't know where it was going to go next. I didn't want to run the risk of it appearing on a streaming service that I didn't have access to. So I read that whole book in 2 weeks and I enjoyed it. I gave it a 5. It was interesting to read. Lady Jessica was my favorite character. I enjoyed it. That's all I can say about it. I enjoyed it. So the next book I read, which was in the month of October, was Someone Had to Do It. That was another book club pick and I gave it a 3.5. The plot itself was interesting, but the characters. Brandy is supposed to be this street smart, she grew up on the streets of New York and her dream is to be a fashion designer, make it work type of girl. That's not who she was. Didn't make not one smart decision in this book. She didn't have no survival skills. She couldn't do nothing. The other protagonist, who's also the antagonist, Taylor is supposed to be this rich girl, femme fatale. That's not who she was. That girl failed out the first day of femme fatale school. The most important thing about being a femme fatale is that nobody is supposed to know your plan except for the person who's helping you do it that you plan to pin it on. But in Taylor's case, everybody knew her plan, and I do mean everybody. Honestly, the only person who was a successful femme fatale was May, Taylor's friend. She actually was pulling it off and doing a good job at it. And then there's Brandy's boyfriend, Nate. Nate is supposed to be like this football player who grew up with all this money and grew up around Taylor and her friends, and so he knows the inner workings of this world of the elite. But for him to be so knowledgeable about it, he sure was not putting 2 and 2 together in the situation, and sure was acting like he didn't know nothing about nothing. But overall, I did give the book a 3.5. The book plot was actually somewhat interesting.
I will also say that it'd make a great Lifetime movie.
So then the next book I read in the month of October was The Hound of The Baskervilles, and I really only read this book because I had the movie recorded and I needed to get it off the DVR. I enjoyed it though. I gave it a 5. I enjoyed the movie too, but the movie did change the twist of the book, and it was kind of, I don't know how I feel about that because the twist in the book was so interesting. It was predictable, but it was interesting. In the movie, they just kind of changed it to be its own thing, which it worked for the movie, but it was like, did we really need to though? But I did enjoy the book. I did enjoy it. It's a Sherlock Holmes book. So then next is Just As I Am by Cicely Tyson. This is a book I read in November. I really loved reading her life story. It was so good. I wanted to read it when it first came out, but I had to wait a little bit. And so what ended up happening was Tati, she also got the book. And so she called me one day. She was like, Ronald, you're not gonna believe how Cicely Tyson ended up in A Fall from Grace. And I was like, don't tell me, because I want to read it for myself. I want to know for myself. So that's why I ended up getting the book and why I ended up reading it. I wasn't really in a rush to read it, but what ended up happening was the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. And if you watch that video, you know I pulled some information from Cicely Tyson's autobiography on what her experience was like filming that movie. And so because I wanted to get that video done, I knew that I needed to finish reading her book in order to get the information I needed for that video. And so that's why I ended up reading it. Now, I did enjoy reading her life story. I gave it a 5. There was a lot of good things in there, a lot of good teaching moments, a lot of good life lessons, a lot of interesting things I would have never expected to have learned about her. There were some people in her life that were polarizing. Her mama reminds me of Gussie Mae from the God Don't Like Ugly series. Some of her decisions just got on my nerves, just like Gussie Mae. But I really loved the way that Cicely Tyson presented it, because it was like, this is my mama, I love her, but now that I'm grown, I understand some of her decisions better, and so I can forgive her for some of the decisions, but this is what my experience was like experiencing it as a kid. The other person in the book that really got on my nerves. Miles Davis. She was really trying hard not to demonize him, but he was really irking my nerves because it's like every time she had something good happen for her, here he came with his mess. I really did enjoy the book though. So then the next book I read was When No One Is Watching, which was a book I read in December. It was my turn to choose a book for book club. This is what I've chose. I got this book in April on Prime Reading because it was in the black section on Prime Reading and it was billed a mystery thriller, right? So today is December 10th and I have been reading this book that I chose for book club called When No One Is Watching. I was promised a thriller. I'm waiting on the thriller to start. I'm concerned I know exactly what type of book this is going to be, and what I mean is I'm concerned it's going to be another one of those explaining blackness to people who are not black type of books, because the whole backdrop of this plot is gentrification. I'm only on chapter 3, but I'm like, how is this gonna go? I thought this was gonna be a black thriller with black protagonists. What we have is a black protagonist named Sydney who's going through it, and then we got a white man named Theo who's our other protagonist with a racist girlfriend. The plot is given Theo's not like other white people. I'm like, what, is he gonna like kill his girlfriend Kim and become Sydney's stalker or something? Like, I'm trying to see where the thriller aspect is gonna come in, because so far it's just been gentrification. Sydney of course don't like it because she's from this area. Theo is not necessarily a fan of the gentrification, but he benefited from it because he moved there. And even though he likes the neighborhood as it is, his girlfriend does not, and thinks that gentrification is going to help improve it. And so it's like, where's the thriller aspect coming in? I hope this is not a flop, because I really don't want to end my year with flops, especially because this is a book club pick and I was so interested in reading this. I've had this book since April, but I haven't had the time to read it, so that's why I chose it for book club. I have a feeling I know how it's finna go. I'm not excited. So today is December 18th. I need to talk about When No One Is Watching. The book club just met on it yesterday. We're kind of all feeling the same way about it. This book was billed as a psychological thriller. This is what it was marketed as. It's not seeming like one because the storyline is about gentrification, and it's seeming more like this book is more like a romance than it is a psychological thriller. So I'm only up to chapter 8, but the other book club members are farther in the book than I am, and everything I'm feeling about the book, they say they're still feeling about the book where they are at. So it's seeming like this book is not really delivering on what it said it was going to be, and for that, right now it is sitting at a 3. So today is December 23rd. I'm on chapter 17 of When No One Is Watching, and I just want to share my thoughts real quick. This book is using gentrification as like the main plot point, and it claims to be a thriller. I ain't seen nothing of a thriller yet in this book. It's 25 chapters in this book. I'm on chapter 17. Sydney is the more annoying main character out of the two between her and Theo, and it kind of sucks. I kind of wanted to like her. Her perspective is annoying, and you know, we just found out some information. It's supposed to be like this big shocking revelation, and I'm just like, really? Like, that's it? That's the big deal? I feel like this book needed a little bit more time to pull together what it was trying to do. It's like gentrification is the main plot point, but I'm still confused as to what the thriller is, because this is coming across more like a romance than it is a thriller. Like, this is coming across like a romance taking place in the middle of gentrification. I feel like there are some interesting concepts here, but they're not being executed to the best of their ability. I gave the book a 2, but I will say that it was the author's first time in writing a thriller. She is typically a romance author, and reading this book and knowing that now, I can tell. The romance between Sydney and Theo is what dragged the book down. The thriller of When No One Is Watching was gentrification, because the focus of the story is gentrification. Literally, while I'm reading it, I'm like, romance during gentrification? Did we need this? Did we really need this? It dragged down the book because there was so much focus put on it that it took away from what the thriller was supposed to be. The thriller ended up coming in at the end. It has a similar issue to Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, in which it presents a real life issue, but the way it's resolved is like a fantasy type of ending. Like, it leans heavily into fantasy with the way it ends. And like with Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, that's not necessarily an issue. It doesn't have to be a real life ending, but it's like the way that it ended just came so out of, like, yes, there were clues leading up to it that was like, okay, something might be going on here, but it was like, because so much time was spent on the romance, it's like when we finally got to the thriller, it felt like it came out of left field. It's kind of like a we won the battle but we didn't win the war type of thing, because it's like, yeah, we stopped it here, but it's still going on. It's still happening in other places. The ending gives the feeling like they finna be going out there like vigilantes fighting it. And I'm like, now with that being said, there were some things that I did like about the book. I like the older people. Their part in the story was so interesting and it brought so much to it. It kind of reminded me of A Gathering of Old Men, where they were like, you know, we've sat around long enough, now we got to do something about it. And the way they went about it was just like so interesting. I did like the historical bits that we did get, explaining like real life historical things that happened in Brooklyn that were related to gentrification and the Black experience there. Those were interesting and those were well done, and I did enjoy those parts. So even though I gave the book a 2, there were some things that I did like about it, that I did enjoy about it. And so the last book that I read this year was The Color Purple, and y'all know why I read this book. I gave it a 5. There's so much that have been left out of all the adaptations of The Color Purple, not just the first movie. It seems like every adaptation leaves out Nettie's subplot. And Nettie's subplot is so good in its own right. Her subplot brought so much to the story. It touched on diaspora wars. It touched on how like Black people are not a monolith, but it also touched on like how there are similarities across the diaspora, even if the people involved don't want to always admit it. It was such a good subplot. It makes me sad that it gets left out of all the media iterations. It was a good book. I gave it a 5. So now we're gonna get into my little award show. The only requirement was that they had to have been a book that I read for the first time this year. So unfortunately, God Don't Like Ugly and Their Eyes Are Watching God are not eligible for any of the book categories, but trust and believe, if they were, they probably would have swept. Their Eyes Are Watching God is eligible for the adaptation category because I did watch that movie for the first time this year. And so with that being said, let's get into these awards. So our first category for this video would be favorite series. There's only 2 nominees here. There's the God Don't Like Ugly series by Mary Monroe, and there's the Lost Fleet series by Jack Campbell. Both of these series I enjoyed reading. Both of them had their pros and their cons. God Don't Like Ugly, you know, it started off good, fizzled a little bit, then it came back with God Ain't Blind, in my opinion, really fizzled off again by the end of the series. The Lost Fleet, it started off good. There was a little bit of a dip at Courageous, but then it came back and finished strong. Both series tend to do a lot of rehashing. In the Lost Fleet's case, it just straight up just took scenes from previous books and just literally reused them. But when it comes down to who's going to win the category, I would say the winner would be God Don't Like Ugly series. Even though it had its issues, I did enjoy the series. I was invested till the end. And it's not to say the Lost Fleet series was terrible, because I did enjoy that one too. But it was just like, after a while, it just became kind of like same old with it. Whereas with the God Don't Like Ugly series, even though it was starting to fall off, it at least brought something new every book. Our next category will be favorite adaptation. Our nominees are Beloved, The Women of Brewster Place, Their Eyes Were Watching God, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, Rebecca, 1940, Devil in a Blue Dress, Kindred, Dune, 1984, and Around the World in 80 Days. I would say these are like my top 10 that I enjoyed. Beloved, The Women of Brewster Place, and Their Eyes Were Watching God, they were all made by the same production company, so they all kind of have like similar things going on. I wouldn't even say it's an issue, but the main thing I noticed with them all is that they tend to change the central messaging of their story. The book focuses on like specifically the Black women characters and like what they have going on, and it's about their story, whereas the adaptations, while they still focus on those characters, towards the end they will always change it to incorporate it and make it a message for everybody. I'm not necessarily mad at it because I understand why they do it, but it's like sometimes I wish y'all would just keep the messaging of what the original story was. And the Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman has similar issues, but like I said in that video, I did like the ending, even though it does feel like fantasy. Now, when it comes to Dune, 1984, I enjoyed that first half of the movie because of how faithful it was to the book. The second half kind of decided to do its own little thing, but I still liked it for what it was. And the other movies in the category and show, in Kindred's case, I just enjoyed in general. When it comes to who wins the category, I would say it would be a tie between The Women of Brewster Place and The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, and I think it's ironic that Cicely Tyson's in both of them. I really enjoyed them. I really did. Our next category, least favorite supporting character. The nominees are Paul D from Beloved, Pops from Cheaters, Shabazz from Minion, Max from Siri Who Am I, and Matthew from A Gathering of Old Men. Now I will say this, it makes me very sad that all the nominees in the least favorite supporting character category are Black men. That makes me sad. Paul D, he came in there trying to run it, trying to be the boss in this lady house, but when the going got tough, he ran away. Now granted, he did come back. He did have some redeemable qualities, but he did irk my nerves at times because it was like, really, Paul D, like, come on now. Now Pops, when I say that there were 3 characters in Cheaters who could have got this nomination, it really came down to Pops, Karen, and Dawn. In Dawn's case, although she did the most in the book, when it came down to it, she was right and she was justified. Karen, she did the most. She was bitter and jealous, but at least it made sense why her character was the way that it was, even though she was annoying. But Pops wanted gratitude for something that nobody asked him to do. Nobody asked you to do it. And the fact that you want a thank you for that, especially when you were sitting up playing favorites on top of that, like, get out of here. Shabazz is here because he's supposed to be the father figure of this vampire hunting group, but he would enable all of the foolishness and then sit up there and be like, we can't dwell on this. Like, get your life together, Shabazz. Max from Siri, Who Am I? The reason he's here is because he was literally the black guy in the book who was not like other black guys. That was his whole personality. And then Matthew from A Gathering of Old Men was the reason everything happened in the book, and then wanted to sit up there and be mad at everybody else. He considered himself to be a real black man while everybody else he considered beneath him. But then when it came down to it, all of these people came together to help him out when they should have left him out to dry, in my opinion. He's the reason the whole plot happened, but then when I get at the end, oh, I know I've been changed. And then he started the shootout, but then when I get in the shootout, oh no, Charlie, it's me, don't do it. What is you doing all of this for? You started it, you did it. And so that's why the winners of this category, yes, it's another tie. The winners is Pops and Matthew. And I don't think it's ironic that the winners of this category are older black men who started the problem in the book, but then wanted to get an attitude and get all annoyed when the stuff started not going their way. Then we get into favorite supporting character. The nominees here are Kevin from Falcon 7, Michael from Waiting to Exhale, Portia from Disappearing Acts, Lily Mae from God Don't Like Ugly series, and Lady Jessica from Dune. So I know y'all probably surprised that Falcon 7 made it into a favorite anything, but it must be said that Kevin was doing it all in this book. He's the reason anything got done in that book. Kevin was the real star. He was who everybody thought Jack John was. Michael in the book is amazing. He is nothing like how he is in the movie. Michael was literally everything Robin wanted in a man. And like Tati said, because he didn't look how she wanted him to look, she wouldn't give him the time of day. But then would sit up and get jealous, even though she's the one that said, I need space and time. And now she want to get mad when Michael's giving her that space and time and also pursuing other possibilities for him in the event that Robin does not choose him. Michael was an amazing character in the book. He deserved better. I don't know why they did him dirty like that in the movie. Portia was my girl. Portia was the only one in the book making some sense. I don't agree with all the decisions she made, but she was the only one making some sense and telling Zora the truth. Like I said, I don't agree with all the decisions she made, but Portia was the only one with some sense. It's the same with Lily Mae. Every time she came around, she tended to be the only person with some sense, the only person speaking the truth, whether Annette wanted to hear it or not. Like with Portia, I don't agree with all the decisions Lily Mae made either, but she was just so fun and she was just so interesting, and she was the only one with some common sense. And then Lady Jessica in Dune, like I said, she was my favorite character in the book. She was just doing it all. And she was doing it all while she was pregnant. But when it comes down to who wins this category, the winner is Lily Mae, because I just really enjoyed her character. I really did. Least favorite antagonist nominees are Taylor from Someone Had to Do It, Mr. PK from Falcon 7, all of the antagonists from The Women of Brewster Place, Jade from God Don't Play, and Franklin from Disappearing Acts. Like I said when I was talking about Someone Had to Do It, Taylor failed as a femme fatale. She was a failure. She was a flop at that. Mr. PK, for him to be the villain of this book, he took his time showing up. Everybody who were antagonists in The Women of Brewster Place, I want to fight, because y'all did them women dirty and y'all ruined them women's lives. Jade from God Don't Play, if you paid attention, you knew she was the villain. And then it's like after that book, she didn't really have no more relevancy to the series. Like, yes, she came back in the books after that, but like she really didn't bring nothing. Like Miss Mary really could have left her down in New Orleans and nothing would have changed. And if I'm being honest, the little backstories that we got about what happened while she was down in New Orleans and Alabama were honestly more interesting than what we got when she was in the book in Richland. And then Franklin from Disappearing Acts, Franklin was the villain. He thought he was all that and he wasn't.
You ain't nobody. I ain't nobody.
The winner of the category for least favorite antagonist is Mr. PK from Falcon 7, because like I said, for him to be the villain and for him to have kicked all of this off, he took his time showing up in the book. He literally didn't show up to the end. The characters had to work his motivations out in the most contrived way. And it's like when he showed up, he really didn't even get a chance to explain himself like that. He showed up, it was like, we know you did it and we send you to be punished. And it's like, we ain't even getting no real explanation for why he did it. Favorite antagonists, they knew they were the villains and they delivered on it. Now, I will say that this category do have some spoilers for Rebecca, but the nominees in this category are Mrs. Danvers from Rebecca, Rebecca from Rebecca, Max de Winter from Rebecca, The Syndicate from the Lost Fleet series, and Fallon Newitt from Minion. You notice how it's 3 nominees from Rebecca, right? And before y'all come at me talking about some Max was not the villain, Max was the villain. Max is the reason we in this mess. He's the villain.
with that being said, him, Rebecca, and Mrs. Danvers, they all ran circles around Lady. Had that lady going through it, all haggard, distressed, in her own house, and the crazy part is Rebecca was dead. Rebecca was running circles around that lady and had her going through it from the grave. The Syndicate was just a very interesting antagonist. As I was reading through the series, I found myself wanting to know more about them, and then Fallon knew it. He was just so smooth with being the villain. He knew he was the villain, and he was just so smooth with it. The winner, I would have to say, is Mrs. Danvers, because she knew she was the villain and she delivered on it. That dress scene.
Oh, stop it, oh, stop it.
That dress scene had me floored. When she showed up at the end, ready to tear it all down, when she realized what Max did to Rebecca, Mrs. Danvers ran circles around that woman. So the nominees for least favorite protagonists are Franklin from Disappearing Acts, Robin from Waiting to Exhale, Wade from Ready Player One, John Jack Kasky from Falcon 7, and Tabitha from Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. Franklin was the villain. That's why he's here. Robin acted like she didn't have no sense. That's why she's here. Wade, he was a child. And so because he was a child, I can cut him some slack. But he was still annoying. He just acted like he was just it. Like him and Franklin had the same issue. They acted like they were just it, but they were not. And like I said in my mid-year review, when I talked about Ready Player One, for Wade to have all this knowledge on 80s pop culture, he sure was not getting none of them clues. Jack John, y'all know how I feel about Jack John. He had all of this legend hyping him up, but he lived up to none of it. The Jack John they described was not the Jack John we got. And Tabitha, like I said when I was talking about the book, Tabitha just was irritating in her own right because she was the issue. I can say that about all of them in this category. All of them were the issue in their books. The winner of the category, I think will surprise no one, is Jack John. Literally the worst protagonist I've read this year. Favorite protagonists, our nominees are Annette from God Don't Like Ugly series, John Geary from the Lost Sweet series, Lorraine from the Women of Brewster Place, Miss Jane Pittman from the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, and Easy Rollins from Devil in a Blue Dress. So Annette, I know y'all probably gonna be like, why Annette here? You know, in them first two books, Annette was good. She was at least making a little bit of sense. You could at least justify her actions based off what she went through. I know as the series went on, she got more and more annoying. She just seemed like to get dumber and dumber. But it's like Tati said when we was talking about God Still Don't Like Ugly. If you wasn't so invested in her story from the first two books, you wouldn't care about her. I was just invested in her. Geary was who Jack John was trying to be, which is hilarious because Geary is also a Jack John, but he doesn't want to be Black Jack because Black Jack is the legend that he's trying not to live up to be, but he ends up living up to it anyways. And I find it interesting, Jack John in Falcon 7 is all, I gotta take matters into my own hands, I gotta be the hero because the powers that be are not doing their job, whereas Geary is like, I don't want to be the hero. I'm not trying to take matters into my own hands, but I have to because apparently I'm the only one who can do this. But I don't want to be the only one who can do this. I need y'all to work with me. And I'm not trying to take over from the powers that be. But he ends up being so good at his job and he ends up just being that influential that he could if he wanted to. And it would make sense. Lorraine from the Women of Brewster Place. I loved Lorraine. The way she ended made me so sad, but she was so relatable to me. Just shy, just sweet, and she didn't deserve what happened to her. I loved her. Miss Jane Pittman, I love Miss Jane Pittman too. I love that she was herself. I love that she didn't change herself. I love that she was not going to allow herself to be bullied, to be knocked down. And I love that she wasn't going down without a fight. And then Easy Rollins from Devil in a Blue Dress. I really enjoyed Easy. He was cool. He was hilarious. He was relatable to me too. He was probably the most relatable Black man I've read this year. He didn't always get it right, but I still enjoyed him. The winner of the category is Easy. It's easy. Yeah, it's easy. Favorite classic. Now, I want to say this. The nominees are based on what Storygraph classifies as classics. The nominees are Beloved by Toni Morrison, Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, Dune by Frank Herbert, The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor, and Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I just enjoyed all these books. The winners is a tie. It's Beloved by Toni Morrison and The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. I just enjoyed the books. I just enjoyed them. I enjoyed them all. Favorite author nominations are Toni Morrison, Mary Monroe, Jack Campbell, Terry McMillan, and Ernest J. Gaines. I feel like y'all already know who's gonna win this category, but in case you don't know, the winner is Ernest J. Gaines. Some of y'all probably shocked. Some of y'all probably gonna be like, over Toni? Yes, over Toni, because I enjoyed all of the works by all of these authors this year. But Ernest J. Gaines, like I said when I talked about Beloved and when I talked about A Gathering of Old Men, I read a comment that said Toni Morrison writes to the hearts of Black women. And I said in A Gathering of Old Men that I feel like Ernest J. Gaines was that for me for black men. He writes to the hearts of black men. That's why he won this year. Least favorite book, the nominees are Falcon 7, Siri Who Am I, Ready Player One, God Don't Make No Mistakes, and Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. I think at this point, y'all know why these books are here. These were the books that I enjoyed the least this year. Y'all know who the winner is. I've been saying it all year. My least favorite book that I have read this year was Falcon 7. And Falcon 7 is the winner. It is still the worst book that I read this year. There was really nothing redeemable about that book. Like, the plot was irritating, the characters were irritating. Yes, Kevin got himself a nomination, but that's literally because he was like the shining star of the book. But even then, he only was able to deliver because Jack John was so stupid that he couldn't put 2 and 2 together. But then when we get into favorite book, our nominees for favorite book are A Gathering of Old Men by Ernest J. Gaines, Beloved by Toni Morrison, Tumbling by Diane McKinney Whetstone, Relentless by Jack Campbell, and Cheaters by Eric Jerome Dickey. Now, this was a very hard category to put together because I enjoyed so many more books than the ones that I have in this category. I chose these 5 books because I really enjoyed them and I feel like they deserve to be here. And so the winners are A Gathering of Old Men and Beloved. You know, those are my 2 favorite authors this year. Of course, their books are going to be the ones that win the category.
Alright, thank you for tuning into this video. Please give it a like, a comment, and subscribe. And please be sure to check out more other content on my channel. And also, if you want to support me, be sure to go check out my books and go buy them because I do write books too. I don't just read them. And I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next year.